Okay, so we've talked about how these systems have evolved through crisis, and we've talked about that learning, but I think it's also important to do a short video about how economics views these systems. So these systems have grown, acknowledging that we now need to think multidimensionally. We need to think about systems which cross from the paid to the unpaid sphere. We have to consider systems which are shaped by risk and by care and by things that economics cannot currently conceptualize. These systems have developed over 70 years, and they are coming to a point of consolidation, because we've just massively eroded all these institutions because we decided they were politically invisible, and left and right agreed on which institutions were politically visible enough to target for austerity, and focused on these institutions where you can't actually do that because you'll only generate crisis, because the labour can't be abdicated, because it's always tied to political responsibility. So we've just generated a massive fucking crisis. So neoclassical economics, which is the economics that John Maynard Keynes tried to get rid of. Now, John Maynard Keynes was also of the opinion that the context changes around institutions, and that the rule of law changes, and that, institutions reflect the evolving rule of law. He already knew all this. But basically, if you read a guy called Hyman Minsky in his revisiting of John Maynard Keynes, what he describes is a process whereby the beliefs that John Maynard Keynes developed as a consequence of kind of seeing World War I and II, and which are at the core of our welfare state development, they were kind of lost as economists decided that Keynes really meant neoclassical economics, which can't conceptualise the function of institutions, it can't conceptualise care, it can't conceptualise the family. It's basically theoretical models wrapped around a rational economic man who's a bit of a psychopath. It talks about market forces. Now, market forces, you hear a lot of people discussing that. Market forces are just an aggregation of everybody's behaviour into kind of wider trends that economists measure. Well, they do not know that market forces includes evolutionary forces. They don't know that the economy includes women. They're still using a simple household unit where the structure of the economy is that men own women in a perfectly rational way, and then women do all this stuff quietly. This is no longer the case. Even if you could put women back in the home, and you can't, you couldn't undo these shifts. We've had changing birth rates, changing lifespans. We've got care is now a major part of our economic future. Our age of population alone means that we need to do it, and economics can't see it, but they can't see these systems either that have evolved and tell them all about this stuff, because they see them as spending. So we're kind of existing at this tension where economists can't see the knowledge that they need that's in these systems because they've just disregarded it as public spending, and it doesn't tally up to their rational economic man, who I don't think ever existed. So what this means is that market fundamentalists who are relying on these theoretical models have completely missed the context changing around them, and that's all intersectionality is. It's a description of these systems which have emerged and matured outside the eye line of politicians, policymakers and economists cannot see it. So that was really, and that's the same, they don't know. So we have a culture of policymakers from three universities in the country that couldn't tell you this. The only three universities in the country who couldn't tell you this are Oxford, Cambridge and the London School of Economics, because they're elite universities and they do not want to reflect on power. They do not understand that we reflect on power. They don't have any connection with political responsibility, and what we're at the moment is where the belief system that they are offering is not telling anybody how these systems work because they can't see it. The belief system that they're offering has just demanded that we strip these systems back. You can see on Twitter that in this period, left and right have shown and demonstrated how they delivered that consensus, but the crisis that existed in 2010 in all these institutions has now grown, and it's getting bigger by the day. And we're generating other crises. I personally think the self-ID crisis is just another one. It's just another crisis that shows that policymakers aren't aware of how these systems function. And we're reaching this tension point where we are faced with, this is the forces that have shaped these systems. This is intersectionality. This is the power dynamics this is shaped, and this is the intersection. This is the rule of law. And this is the belief system that can't see these systems. Now, there have been lots and lots and lots of attempts to quantify care, but you can't quantify it because it means quantifying women's unpaid labour. Nobody really wants to do that, and the tools that they have won't do that. But what's really important to understand is the resistance within economics as a discipline. Even at the LSE, which has the Gender Institute is a silo. And their business model is around these belief systems that cannot see these systems. And what you're seeing with the crisis of the centre-left is a culture who can't see these systems, who don't know anything about them, but also have an identity where they're the voice of them. And the dissonance between their function and identity is being played out in increasingly abusive behaviour online. And this is partly why, the culture of the left are so dangerous to be around, especially for people who understand these systems.